All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking your time and joining this event. My name is Jenny Pantulian. I'm a professor of political science and international affairs. Our program chair is out of town, otherwise he would be standing here. So I was asked to chair this panel. I also want to explain that this for us is it's a new field for us, and we thought it would be very interesting to start a small state studies focus in our research center, so we're very excited. This is the first sort of inaugural event. We hope that there will be more events like that, and this is just the beginning. I want to particularly thank Dr. Nationalism. It's thanks to his energy and his idea. He actually convinced us that this is something we should be doing. Armenia is a small state studies research is a fascinating field. And it's a very relevant topic, and it's thanks to him that this panel is actually happening. So, right, and that being said, I don't want to take too much time, so I'm just going to very shortly introduce the speakers today, starting with Dr. Nationalism. He's an AUA alumnus. He studied with us in political science. Currently, he is an adjunct lecturer at AUA teaching history. He has a PhD in history. He's defended his PhD last year, for which we're very happy to congratulate him. He's also currently a member of the parliament because he took an active role in the Velvet Revolution. And I want to emphasize that he took, as a citizen, took an active role in the Velvet Revolution. I think he likes to emphasize that he's not necessarily affiliated to any political party, but he believes in this project, and again, he's been inspiring our students. All right, sorry, you have to say all these things about that. So thank you for being here. It's great. Our second, I have nothing to do with the order. I didn't pick this kind of order. I think it's the Armenian thing that the guys are on the flanks protecting the women. So, all right, the second speaker on our panel is Dr. Untitled. She holds a PhD in international relations from Nanjing University of China. She's specializing in international security, particularly in cybersecurity and digitalization and e-governance. In 2017, she was selected and started working with the e-government through a very prestigious program. It's called Yes Armenia, which is Young Experts. So the EU project, the goal of it was to bring young scholars' expertise into the e-government. She worked on the development of the national cybersecurity strategy of the Republic of Armenia. Dr. Parzian became a member of the special working group of experts for national cybersecurity strategy. And she also contributed to the first ever event on national cybersecurity awareness in schools. So she's a pioneer in this very important topic. She holds a number of positions. She's an expert, security expert at the China-Eurasia Council for Political Strategic Research, and she's also an executive board member. Dr. Parzian occasionally gives presentations in cybersecurity, digitalization issues in Armenia, in China, and in Europe. She's an author of several academic publications, one of which was awarded an honorary certificate from Nanjing University of China. And she'll be talking about cybersecurity here. Our third speaker is Dr. Celia Daughter from Iceland. So welcome to Armenia. She's an associate professor at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Iceland. Her research mainly focuses on Icelandic society and politics, Iceland's foreign and security policy, and, this is my favorite part, feminist international relations. How many of you have heard of feminist international relations? So she holds a number of graduate degrees, MMA and a PhD. Her last degree and PhD was from the University College Cork. And she, as well as postgraduate certificates in methodology and social science from the University of Iceland. She's engaged in numerous research projects on feminist foreign policy, peace studies, resilience, and social security. Dr. Daughter was also a delegate of Iceland's Constitutional Council in 2011, where she chaired a committee addressing human rights and natural resources, and we just yesterday in my class when we talked about Icelandic Constitution. It's a fascinating case. Currently, she's the chair of Iceland's General Council, vice chair of the board of the Institute of International Affairs at the University of Iceland, serves on the board of Icelandic Red Cross, and the board of advisors of the Reykjavik Peace Center, and I went there to try to pronounce the Icelandic name for that center. And she's a member of the Icelandic chapter of the Nordic Mediator Network. Not a lot of this, Nationalism is also a PSI alumnus, and he's a researcher focusing on comparative education policy and philosophy of education. He has supervised the largest needs assessment study for improvement of Armenia's state standards for general education, commissioned by the World Bank. He is the co-founder of Paradigma Educational Foundation, which empowers teachers to create learning communities of practice in Armenia. So thank you very much to all four of you. We're looking forward to a very interesting panel discussion. And with that, I hand it over to Dr. Naima Karchan first. My apologies. Dean, I think maybe you should have started this instead of me. He, but you know, I'm familiar with last moment, so I apologize for not keeping the protocol.
Hello all. Welcome to the inaugural workshop on Small State Studies Initiative. For the few of you in the audience who might not know, the Georgian Center for Policy Analysis, DCPA, is a nonprofit independent organization, and it was established 24 years ago under the aegis of our Political Science and International Affairs program. And it has as its primary mission the promotion of objective, disinterested research in the area of policy analysis. It has undertaken as its most recent project this Small State Studies Initiative as a transdisciplinary area of research and potential pedagogy with a rather complex definitional identity, one that prospectively strengthens our ties with other institutions of higher education and helps further internationalize AUA. The possibilities of this initiative are both quite promising and very exciting for PSIA. In pursuit of developing the Small States Initiative through TCPA, the PSIA faculty have organized an exploratory workshop and lecture series with a broad research agenda and various topics and possible lines of inquiry, such as, for example, explorations of small states theory, application of small states to Armenia, especially at this pivotal juncture in the country's socio-political history, an investigation of multiple research directions, a study of institutions as influential and compensatory forces, security studies vis-a-vis small states, and so forth. The papers presented by various scholars in this series will be published electronically as publicly accessible briefs. Conversations, debates, published research, and quite importantly, policy recommendations will of course result from these explorations, and ultimately, in the short term, the Center aims to hold a large international conference on the topic of small states sometime in the first half of next year. So look for that, please. The initiative has already marshaled support from the University of Iceland, clearly, and interest from entities in Sweden, France, and Argentina. At the moment, the series focuses its attention on 4 areas under the umbrella of small states: technology, diaspora, security, and institutions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Naima Karchan, who will open this inaugural workshop by telling us a little about the development of the vision for the initiative, its application for Armenia, and some research directions. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, welcome, your guests, students, professors. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to ABIC for this inaugural workshop for the Initiative for Small State Studies. So before I will introduce the research directions and the small state theory, I would like to say a couple of words about the story behind this initiative. Months, if not years, of preparation have gone into this event, and I'm very thankful to the PSI program chair, Baran, the Mathematics Associate Professor, and PSI Professor Jenny Batran, to our colleagues from the Center for Small State Studies at the University of Iceland for getting this ball rolling. So the idea of small state studies came to mind in 2013 when, as an ABA graduate, I was asked by Professor Baran to join a research group of ABIC to be part of a research project in the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. In 2015, I was invited to the University of Iceland to deliver a lecture on the Armenian genocide. And during that event, I had a chance to visit a center for small state studies, one of the prominent centers in the world, located at the University of Iceland. During my different research visits to the University of Iceland, I could manage to reach the initial agreement in establishing cooperation between AUA and the University of Iceland. The Untitled Center for Policy Analysis, after our negotiations, has formed a recent working group on small state studies to start the process of cooperation within the framework of the Erasmus Plus project. Our first step to make Armenia as a part of the small state studies discourse was to attend the International Conference on Small States and the New Security Environment held in Reykjavik on 26th of June 2018. Now, I and Barante and Matawasan have finished our contribution to the edited volume, which will be published in the book series The World of Small States. Moreover, the Initiative for Small State Studies in AUA started a blog series, series on small state studies. The primary focus of the small state studies concern with particular challenges and constraints faced by small states. The application of small state theory for Armenian context can be a major value added to Armenian studies because small state theory touches upon a range of topics in the field of international relations, political science, diaspora studies, public administration, information technologies, law, etc. Despite its relevance and importance for Armenian development, the small state study has so far not received enough attention in the Armenian academic discourse, which means that our initiative will try to fill that gap. The Small State Studies Initiative is an excellent case in point how AUA can make ideas happen. First, I was thinking about small state studies as an AUA graduate student, then it became a topic of research, university team, and then as an AUA lecturer, researcher became a co-founder of this initiative. Now something has been changed, and I became a member of parliament. I really feel the necessity of research before making decisions. So I hope we can turn this initiative into a platform for policy recommendations to the government. Now about the definition of smallness. What do we mean by small? The first question, of course, connects to small state studies is what do we mean by small? There is no widely accepted definition, a concept providing the definition of small state. Despite the interest in small state studies had started since 18th century, it is considered one of the youngest disciplines in international relations. Another wave of interest in small state studies began with the study of wartime diplomacy of small states by Annette Fox after WWQ, when the survival of small states became a foundational question. Academic interest in small state studies had reached its peak in 1970s, but again went into stagnation in 1980s and 1990s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the discourse on small state size again became a matter of academic discussions for many political scientists, especially by Scandinavian political scientists. Small state studies especially have been applied to European countries, but the application of small state theory to post-Soviet context can open up new discourse in the field. But first of all, it's important to define a small state. So there are a number of variables in defining small states. Among the variables are population size of the economy, GDP, territorial size, military capabilities, natural resources, etc. For example, the World Bank tends to use a limit of 1.5 million people to count nations as small. Or it is known that the majority of member states in UN are small states. While during informal grouping, the UN, the form of small states, defines small states as those with a population of fewer than 10 million people. So definition differ from source to source, from author to author. We need to study the characteristics of certain small states in order to understand the concept of certain small states. Smallness is a concept. It's a concept which mostly causes misunderstanding while equating it with the efficiency of power or capability. In this regard, the examination of capabilities and institutions can provide a new insight into the nature of small states. The concept of smallness often wrongly used in Armenian academic political discourses by equating it with the weakness and inability. So we need to define smallness in order to make differentiation between smallness and weakness. What kind of theories exist in small state studies. So there are a couple of theories. I would like to focus on two theories. Status-seeking theory. First of all, state seek status for themselves. With respect to this, our initiative can do some research in understanding what kind of status Armenia wants to achieve for itself. In other words, it's about state's identity, international identity. A small state's nature and influence are ultimately determined by its relevance. This in turn depends on its ability to tell its story and to generate and export new values and ideas. So we need to understand what is the concept, what kind of concept as a small state we want to apply for Armenia. Another theory of small state studies concerns the shelter theory developed by Baldur Thoraldsson from the University of Iceland. The position of small state in international system can be described by the shelter theory, which defines small state vulnerabilities by three categories: political, economic, and societal. The mentioned vulnerabilities push small states to find alliances and patterns, which, for example, can be formed by providers of political, economic, and societal shelters by great powers or by international organizations. In case of Armenia, the shelter theory can be applied only partially. According to shelter theory, small states seek political shelter for both military and diplomatic backing because states with smaller populations, less access to the wealth, and less territory lack the self-sufficiency, resources, and strategic depth needed to defend themselves, including the maintenance of adequate armed forces. Nevertheless, Armenia's smaller population, lack of resources, and less territory doesn't detract its capabilities in defending itself and maintaining one of the most compatible armies of the post-Soviet space. Considering the fact that Armenia is a strategic ally of Russia and member of Collective Security Treaty Organization, one could argue that Armenia found a political shelter in Russia-led organizations. The same shelter theory argues that alliances declare conflict, reduce the likelihood that allies are targeted, and guarantee military assistance to allies in case they are attacked. However, when in 2016, Azerbaijan attacked on Nagorno-Karabakh, the defense and the security of Armenia was maintained by the armed forces of Armenia, but not by the so-called shelter providers. However, considering the strategic partnership between Azerbaijan and Turkey, unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the Turkish-Azerbaijani blockade of Armenia, and the unrecognized Armenian genocide take us to not underestimate the potential of political shelter. The Armenian societal shelter can be provided by its own diaspora, which traditionally has been considered the introducer and implementer of innovative projects in Armenia. For example, this university also is considered the idea initiated by some representatives of Armenian and diaspora Armenians living in different parts of the world, mainly in the United States of America. What kind of research directions do we want to have within our initiative? To conceptualize the Republic of Armenia as a small state, we have decided to apply holistic methodology, especially focusing on security, institutions, diaspora, and high technologies. Armenia, being situated in an unstable region, remains a geopolitically challenging situation. Two major foreign policy issues have shaped its security agenda since the early 1990s, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the Turkish-Azerbaijani blockade of Armenia. The conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh remains a perplexing challenge for the regional security and development. With close border in the west and combined borders in the east, Armenia is one of the rare small states in the world that has more than 80% of its borders sealed. Armenia has only two borders open with Georgia, more than 200 kilometers in the north, and with Iran, 44 kilometers in the south. Another research direction concerns institutions. The study of institutions are important in understanding how can domestic institutions determine small states' international engagement. How can domestic institutions foster foreign investment? Can institutions create investment incentives for the accomplishment of creative ideas and investment in high technologies? The creation of inclusive institutions is more than necessary for the resource building of small state Armenia. The importance of inclusive institutional reform is recognized also as a priority by the new government of the Republic of Armenia. In the chapter 5, there is a paragraph on the inclusivization of economy of the Republic of Armenia. So this policy of inclusivization of domestic institutions affects also Armenia's international identity, and this is about the international identity of a small state. Inclusive institutions can open new opportunities for small states to have their significant place in the global, in the map of global world and create incentives for the accomplishment of, again, creative ideas and investments. A small state with security deficit like Armenia needs to establish inclusive institutions aiming at creating democratic prosperity, incentives for technological investment in the military sector despite its size, geographic location, and cultural context. Another characteristics of Armenia as a small state is the diaspora, its huge diaspora. Armenia's uniqueness as a small state, of course, its powerful diaspora widespread around the world, from the ethnic borders of Armenia, such as from Argentina to Japan and from Australia to Canada. The Armenian societal shelter, if we apply this shelter theory, can be provided by its own diaspora, which traditionally has been considered again the introducer of innovative ideas. Armenian diaspora has a potential to compensate its smallness in international system. The social capital of Armenian nation has to redefine its physically and economically smallness. So the existence of over 8 million Armenians in diaspora across the continents can be economic, social, and even diplomatic shelter for Armenia. So this direction can fill the discourse of small state studies as if we consider diaspora as an additional variable in defining small state. The high technologies, the final Christian direction that we apply in this initiative. So everyone knows that we live in a post-industrial world which has created golden opportunities for small states to have their unique place again in global world. Indeed, the network society caused by high technologies pose serious challenges to small states in case of security and again identity. However, in case of appropriate responses, those challenges could be turned into opportunities. For example, the future of Armenian language, Western and Eastern, depends on to what extent will make it the language of technology or of artificial intelligence, for example. Armenia as a small state is on the way to becoming a technology generating state not only for the cost of expense but also for the global market. The new high technologies and institution building processes are closely interconnected. The development of high technologies is important for both economic growth and institutional reform. Taking into consideration the number of ICT specialists and registered international ICT companies and the government intention to provide smart solutions in different spheres, one can conceptualize Armenia as a small but smart. So, for example, this can be one of the key concepts of Armenia as a small state. For example, according to data by the Enterprise Foundation 2018 report, the number of workers employed in the IT sector reached up to 20,000 in 2008, which reflects an increase of approximately 27% over 2007. In 2008, within a year, 150 new ICT companies were established in Armenia, as a result of which the number of ICT sector jobs increased by 5,000. Now we have several international competent countries operating in Armenia, like Synopsys, National Instruments, Mentor Graphics, Cisco, System Development, Pixar, Solar Learning, etc. Use Armenia has a potential to turn into island of technologies in post-Soviet space, which is viewed by new authorities of Armenia. This systemized the sphere. In 2019, the government of Armenia decided to create a Ministry of High Technologies in the industry. Another symbolic act showing Armenia's willingness to become Silicon Valley of the post-Soviet space or South Caucasus region is the upcoming 23rd World Congress of Information Technology to be held in October 2009 in Yerevan. Thank you for your attention.
Well, the only purpose for me to come down there is just to hand it over to the next speaker, right? Yeah, I think so. Well, I'll stay here just in case. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be here. It's an honor for me to present my research, and I invite you to discuss cybersecurity strategy for India for the increasingly small state big challenges. So, cyberspace is a man-made domain for international relations because whatever we are doing now in our life is closely dependent on technology. Our daily lives, our communication, our high-quality education, and our state is also dependent on high-quality technologies. But all of this is not only for good, but also for bad reason as well, because the ultimate achievement of humanity, the equal access to information, brings not only good, but also bad usage. So it's difficult to struggle against that and to protect the nation. So it becomes very difficult to interact in international space, so it becomes a problem of international security. It becomes also the main for wars, because many states understanding that it is difficult to protect the nation from different types of attacks. Kinetic weapons, for example, as compared with cyber weapons, are very difficult to obtain because they are expensive, and at the same time it is easy to understand the origin of their to detect their origin. But for cyber weapons, it is difficult to understand where are they coming from, who is the sponsor of this attack, and how to detect and to protect the nation. So many countries use irregular and types of attack to protect the nation. So in November, for example, 2011, the Department of Defense of the US issued a report declaring that it was ready to add cyberspace to sea, land, air, and space as the latest demand and warfare, and military would, if necessary, use force to protect the nation. So it is irregular warfare happening in the cyberspace. NATO nations are doing the same. They are recognizing cyberspace as a domain of operations in which NATO must defend itself as effectively as it does in the air, on land, and at sea. So we see that cyberspace becomes something similar to ground, to land, to sea, and the protection and the defection mechanism should be the same. The problem becomes very evident if we also discuss the things with the critical infrastructure protection mechanism for the state. If we consider critical infrastructure, so we can understand that nowadays an advanced critical infrastructures are mainly operated with advanced technology. So a single penetration into, for example, an energy system or a water system can actually hack and stop the whole operation of the country. So it becomes a national security problem. For that reason, it's very important to understand the origin of these cyber attacks and also to have protective mechanisms to detect them and to struggle against them. So now let's understand whether small states and big states have the same type of opportunities in cyberspace, or they have different opportunities. So do small states face a unique set of cybersecurity challenges or similar to powerful states? First of all, I would like to talk about capabilities disproportionate to their size, as compared with human resources, as compared to their other type of resources, for example, their situation, their sea access, whatever. So in cyberspace, they can have disproportionate capabilities to their natural resources. For example, the case of Estonia. It's a small state in its description, but it has a super cybersecurity protection, very much protected due to its 2007 attack. Actually, Estonia collapsed for 1 week because of energy sector attack, and after that, it was able to make a mechanism that can protect itself. So now it becomes one of the leading countries in the EU, having great cybersecurity protection. Our neighbor Georgia had a similar experience with the war and also developed a very much protective cybersecurity mechanism, and it is the leader in the region. So I will give you a very short description of a chart. ITQ chart, that is International Telecommunication Union, that provides this chart. As we see, we have 2018, which Armenia has the global ranking 79. That's very much better than it was last year. We had only 110 last year, and we actually have 79 this year. But as we compare it with Azerbaijan or with Georgia or with Russia, we still have a lot of things to do. The good news about this is that we can do it using very limited resources, but because when I researched on the methodology of this ranking, so most of the things are on a legislative proposal, so we can do and we can make our rankings higher if we just accept several legislative proposals. So the next one is the paradox of vulnerability. It's interesting, but the more advanced the cyber capabilities of the states are, the more vulnerable they become. Actually, this is a paradox because the more your technology and your government is actually using technologies, the more vulnerable you become. So, of course, this is not an issue to say that, okay, let's not develop our country and let's just not use the technology because we will not be hacked. But actually, this is a nice opportunity because it is a kind of chance to give to small states to understand that with limited resources, you can protect whatever you have, and that's great because it's not very much possible that great powers will attack you because they have their own affairs. So you usually have problems with those who have some military issues with you, or with some hackers that are not state-sponsored, for example, and it will be much easier to detect them and to protect the system. The next one is the small states and norms of conduct in cyberspace. Actually, as compared with other spheres where norms of conduct are usually accepted by big states, and small states usually follow these already accepted norms of conduct, in cyberspace it is not developed yet. So Armenia, as a small state, can participate in these norm conduction procedures and development procedures, thus becoming a so-called norm entrepreneur. So it means that we will become an active participator in this new space, and maybe we will have opportunities to be much active in this field. So China, Russia, and US cyber triangle is an issue nowadays discussed very much in cyberspace norms of conduct, because we have here two camps. One camp is the US with the LA supporting that cyberspace should be free of all kinds of regulations, and it should be free space for usage. And Russia and China are more of idea that it should be a sovereignty space for states also in cyberspace. So in this case, it will be very, very difficult to understand which camp to join, but at the same time, it will be very easy to understand maybe we can become such kind of linkage between these two camps, and maybe we can propose our own ideas whether to be in this camp or not. So Secure the Space of Armenia is the initiative, is the research that I'm doing now, and I will try to invite you for the discussion of this issue. So big cybersecurity challenges of small Armenia. Armenia here is small just as a theory part, not because I really don't think that Armenia is small, because I believe in our capabilities. Though the cybersecurity field in Armenia is still in the early development stages and requires both conceptualization and definition of the main components and tasks to address them. So, in regional and global cybersecurity index of Armenia has a dramatically low rate that overall decreases the status of digital development index of Armenia, both globally and regionally. No specific legislation for cybersecurity operates nationwide, and no specified unit or standardized measurements or methodology or maybe framework regulates cybersecurity policy. Digital Armenia Foundation was functioning last year, but it was shut down later because of foundation, and actually it was initiating several ideas regarding cybersecurity policies, and I was involved in this policy regulations. So cyberspace and critical infrastructure for Armenia. To define cyber-sensitive critical infrastructure is important, dramatically important for Armenia. Why? Because they are critical infrastructures which are not sensitive to cyber attacks, and they are critical infrastructures which are sensitive to cyber attacks. So first we have to understand which are sensitive to cyber attacks. if some war penetrates into this infrastructure, will it shut down Armenians, for example, energy system or water supply or whatever, or not? So if they are sensitive, what should we do? To promote legislation to adopt and declare them as critical infrastructure. Because if we don't declare them as critical infrastructure, the tax towards these critical infrastructures will not become a national security issue, and we cannot, and we will not be able to promote this issue in international field and to discuss this on, for example, UN Security Council, for example. Then to promote measurements and standards to private sector and public sectors of CI. Our critical infrastructures are mostly operated by private sector entrepreneurs. So, in one part we have our state government and the nation. On the other hand, we have private sector which operates its critical infrastructure. For example, there is an attack to specific critical infrastructure. Who is the attacker? Is it a hacker? Is it a non-state organization? Or is it a state-sponsored hacker group? All of these three groups should be examined, and we should understand why the attack occurs. If it is an attacker, just a hacker, maybe we can tackle it as a detection and protection mechanism. If it is a hacking group, why the hacking group is attacking this specified critical infrastructure? Maybe the problem is in the private sector, and we have to discuss this issue with this organization and to find out whether maybe this organization has some problems in international field, and we should avoid having contracts in further with this organization, or maybe not. We just help them go further. And if it is a state-sponsored attack, this is a national security issue. So we have to talk about this on a different level, and we have to be able to protect our nation from cyber attacks. Next one is the supervise, evaluate security and resilience of critical information infrastructure promoting safety and security. And then methodological procedures and processes to help CI entities and operators to first identify and then manage cybersecurity risks. There are a lot of examples in international field that critical infrastructures are hacked, but the operators do not understand that they are hacked because not every specialist can understand and can see the attack. So we have to help the critical infrastructure sectors to define that and to understand that. CI protection mechanism that I am working, and I actually suppose that it is the best maybe platform or the type of making it workable or effective is the following. To have 5 steps to protect critical infrastructure: identity, protection, detection, response and recovery. So identity is the asset management, governance, and risk management. Every critical infrastructure protection mechanism should start with identity. Then protection. We have to train. We have to train the workers that are working there. We have to train the experts that see the attacks, and they have to what to do next. Whom they have to call and say, "Hey, we have an attack here on a national level. What should I do?" So these people should know whom to call, who is the response person, who is the person that have to call, for example, to another person and to protect this mechanism. Next one is the detection. We have an attack. What kind of attack it is? So we have to have a detection mechanism. We have to specify this is an attacker, this is a sponsor, this is a small one, we can detect it. Next one is the response. Okay, we're hacked. What should we do? Should we shut down the government? Should we shut down the country? Should we leave from here? What should we do? We have to understand how we respond in this situation. And the last one is the recovery. After, for example, all hospitals are out of energy, how we can respond and how we have to recover this. This should be very much detailed. The procedure should be defined clearly, and everyone should understand what should do. Next one is the securing cyberspace on the regional and international level, and institutional and international approach. I've talked already that Armenia, as a small state, can take the opportunity to disproportionately be very active in its cybersecurity international diplomacy and can become an active actor in cyber diplomacy. So for that reason, we need joint agreements on security in cyberspace. We need common definitions and shared norms of conduct. This is really very important. What is common definitions? Maybe I would call the same as information security, and the other state will call it cyber security. But when we have an attack, we should understand what we're talking about. In that case, we have to have common definitions, and we also have to have shared norms of conduct. If I have one type of virus, then my neighbor, for example, will have the same type of virus maybe 2 days later. If we share information, in that case, we will have protected infrastructure. This is like an Ebola virus. If it happens in one part of the state, country, it will come to you as well if you don't help them to protect the nation. The last and not the least one is the drill exercises that should actually be all the time taken on a regional level, on an international level, to protect our nations from possible cyber attacks. I've talked all about this already because I'm short of time. I will just say that here I describe just how I see the cooperation in all these fields. Our neighbors on a regional level, international level, international presence, and of course raising awareness campaigns that will give information to population, to work people on a different part in government, as critical information infrastructures and everywhere, so that people will be very able to protect themselves. And conclusion, small on earth, big in cyberspace. This is the motto, maybe I suggest, to see Armenia and to try to use capabilities to be active in this newly developed space. Thank you very much.
It's a very insightful presentation. All right. So we someone talk from the audience.
Okay, hi, my name is Celia, and I'm going to switch to a very different place and a very different topic. Thank you for being here, and thank you for hosting me here at the American University of Armenia. I've had the opportunity to engage with 2 classrooms already, and I hope they enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm very impressed with the students and the reception I've gotten here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Iceland's branding and niche diplomacy, and I'm going to take the example of gender equality in foreign policy. And I'm very glad that Marek was here first, because otherwise I felt like I would have had to spend a lot of time on definitions and what it is to be a small state and so on. But by any measure that you look at, Iceland qualifies as a small state. We are only 350,000 people. And we have a small geography, we do not have a military, we have a small economy, minimal resources, no military, so on. So we do not basically have what you would traditionally define as power in international relations. But Iceland, especially through its sort of Nordic identity, has been able to promote certain issues that it uses to achieve status and then to transfer that status in one area to another. Gender equality, or Sweden actually uses the term feminist foreign policy. Iceland doesn't do that formally, but it does identify gender equality as one of the pillars of its foreign policy. And how can it do that, and based on what? Since 2009, Iceland had a financial meltdown in 2008, the crash, we call it. After that, we had a big left swing in elections, and the number of women was increased significantly in parliament and in government. We got our first female prime minister, and the representation of women remained fairly high. Well, started dropping again last year, but this was sufficient for Iceland to take the top seat in the World Economic Forum's gender gap report, and we've maintained that seat now for 10 years. So using that and various other measures of gender equality, Iceland has been able to promote itself as the best place in the world to be a woman. And it's not just Iceland that does it. So this picture that I have is actually an Australian documentary called Defending Gender. And if you've read this already, this has like all the stereotypes of Iceland in it. The Viking nation of Iceland has become a feminist utopia. So So what does this mean, and in what context does this come from? During the Cold War, the Nordic countries had a fairly special place in international relations, often called Nordic exceptionalism, referred to as the Nordic balance when it came to military alignment, where you had Finland and Sweden being neutral, Denmark, Iceland, and Norway being members of NATO. So they were able to sort of work east and west, and they were able to often take an active stance with countries in the south, with human rights organizations and activism. So the Nordics had a peaceful place in the world during the Cold War, but as the EU has grown and stability has grown in Europe, that identity of peacefulness has not become as significant. It doesn't make the Nordic region special anymore. So what can they have in its place? One of the issues that has come up is gender equality. Aside from Iceland, the other Nordic countries often rank very high on these measurements, these indices that we have. And it actually fits very well with the way that the Nordics used to do politics, foreign policy, because it is an activist policy. It requires you to promote certain values, and it builds on an organization, so working through international organizations and engaging with others through them. Going through to branding, I'm just going to introduce this concept very quickly. This, of course, comes from advertising, but has been transferred through to new public diplomacy, through this idea of place branding, where countries or destinations try to promote themselves as a certain brand. It's useful for attracting tourists, but also for increasing investment and strengthening exports. Because if you have a strong brand, people will relate it to your businesses, not just to the values that you're promoting. And as I said, Iceland had been trying to market itself as actually a financial center, financial hub, in the years before the financial crash. That came burning down very quickly in about a week, in September, October 2008. So for us, having something to relate to internationally, as the gender gap report, for example, helped us to reclaim credibility, to say, oh, we may have not been so good at this, but look at us now. This enhances influence abroad and helps us strengthen international cooperation. And then through new public diplomacy, using social media and so on, making the country is able to make foreign publics aware of its interests and objectives. It creates a brand based on an attractive culture and morally admirable policies, that gender equality is good, that we should all strive to be like the Nordic countries and so on. And it builds on these coalitions between states and NGOs and the media. And the status of women in Iceland is certainly has benefited in the last 20 years or so from state initiatives through legislation and so on. But those initiatives would not have happened if it wasn't for a very active women's movements, women's rights movements from the early 20th century. So here what's important to keep in mind when we look at this is that it's not really the product, it's not really the content of the gender equality that the standard is high, but it's the image that matters for the branding. It's the strategic equity that the state has to build on its to build up its reputation abroad. And because I mentioned that Sweden actually uses the term feminist in its foreign policy, Iceland hasn't gone that far, and the main difference is that in Iceland's policies you do not have this element of attempting to be a critical and disruptive social movement, aiming to affect social change, but rather only to enhance women's status and power. So it's not the disruption and changing of patriarchy or the gendered system, but mostly just bringing up the case of gender equality and using any forum you have to talk about this issue. And what Iceland has done in particular is to talk about the involvement of men, the engagement of men when it comes to gender equality, and of course the benefits that gender equality has to men as well as women. But what Iceland has done, and I put feminist there in the because gender equal foreign policy doesn't have the same ring, so I have the feminist in brackets and talk about it that way. So this is a niche diplomacy. Being a small country with very limited resources, with a very small foreign service, we have about 200 people in total working in the foreign service at home and abroad. That means we just don't have the capacity, we don't have the manpower to promote issues of all the issues that we would like to engage in. So you have to pick one issue or a few. So Iceland, basically, for example, in the UN, it focuses on gender equality and issues related to the oceans. We have what's called the United Nations Universities in Iceland that work on fisheries, on desertification, on geothermal, and on gender equality. So we have these 4 programs where we basically export our expertise in these 4 issues. And in all the research that we've been doing over the last few years, interviewing diplomats and looking at policies that are being implemented, it's really the gender equality that it comes up in so much more cases and volume than the other ones. And this really is quite impressive that it's happened in such a short time. And I think largely it is because we got this recognition from abroad and realized that this was actually a niche where we would get recognition. That because if we go back only as far as 2003 or 2005, we had never had a woman as a foreign minister. There have now been 3, but each one only for a very short time. But the emergence of women in the public service, and especially women who have had training in or experiences in feminist and women's rights circles that are now identified in the Nordic countries at least as femocrats, so feminist bureaucrats, have actually had more impact than maybe the leaders. And as I said, gender equality has now become a pillar of Icelandic foreign policy. And the emphasis is mainly on men inequality. And the main project that has been promulgated in now every international governmental organization that Iceland is a member of is what's called the Barbershop Project. And that is set up as a space for men to talk about gender equality. So how many men here have engaged in a discussion on gender equality? Yeah, 3? Yeah. That's probably around average. The first idea was to not have any women, just let men talk about gender equality. And our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, he said that barbershop should be a safe place for men to speak freely, much like the locker room. And if you think about US politics, you don't really get a positive connotation from that one. So this has actually become more where women and men come together, and the Icelandic Parliament has done this. We had the Me Too movement, which went around the world about a couple of years ago. The Icelandic Parliament actually ran a workshop like this to try to facilitate a discussion where men and women could both feel comfortable talking about this. And the ministry has a toolkit now that has been developed, so anybody basically can pick up this toolkit and run a seminar like this. The ministry has also seconded gender experts to various organizations, and over the last 5 years now there's been men who go and work on these issues from Iceland, and this is something that Iceland actually profiles itself on very much, that we're so good at gender equality that even the men can do it. So we can discuss that a little bit more in the conversation, whether it's really true. But remember, when it comes to branding, it's not the content, but the image that matters, right? It's what you project to the outside. And at home and abroad, the He for She has really been the campaign from the UN that is led by Emma Watson, Harry Potter, and other films. In Iceland, the ratio that we're always the best at everything per capita. So because we're so small, we do this per capita. We're the best in the world. So it's it's a part of our identity. So there's more people per capita that have signed up in for the He for She campaign in Iceland than in any other country in the world. And our last 2 prime ministers, male prime ministers, the current one is a woman, they've both become been designated as he for she champions by the UN. So they go, they accept this mantle of being, well, at least pro-gender equality, if not quite feminist. And at home, they lead parties that have no gender equality representation requirements, have no focus on improving the status of women. So again, easy to export, a little bit harder to maintain at home. So when I was a kid, and even today, I think when we used to eat haddock, fish is our main export, and I was growing up eating haddock, and then I started traveling, and I realized that I couldn't get haddock anywhere else. That's because we always exported the cod, and we never ate cod in Iceland. So, so I say, you know, gender equality for some political parties is like cod, and we just keep the haddock at home. It's okay to have the gender biases remaining there. So the questions are we branding ourselves, or are we blazing a path? Are we creating a model for somebody else to follow? And in a sense, yes. I mean, we are projecting an image that we want other countries to aspire to. We want them to be impressed by this moral leadership, by the norm entrepreneurship that I mentioned as well, and that gender equality is something you should strive for. But it doesn't have this feminist undertone that objective even that the Swedish policy does of disrupting the gender system, patriarchy. But it is very useful for enhancing our credibility abroad through this niche, this very delimited part of our diplomacy, which then gives us credibility that we can transfer to other issues and to other organizations. Especially with the focus on men, which has been a unique characteristic of Icelandic Gender Equality Corporation. One of the worries that I have is that this creates sort of what we would call a gender nationalism, that when we have immigrant groups that have different culture on gender equality, that we can say like, oh, that's a reason for excluding them and not letting them participate because you know, our culture is better. And even that it's a way of looking down at others and saying, oh, they're so far behind us that you know, they need to learn from us that we're better and we can yeah, that we don't need to learn ourselves from the way other people do it, but that we are the ones who can export authority and knowledge on this. And also what is not recognized here is that this really builds on the status of women, which has been built through activism and through the grassroots and civil society movements. And so the state is sort of accepting, you know, or co-opting the work of civil society to attract power and influence in the international arena. So what is it that we're doing? Are we branding ourselves? This is our last prime minister. He has run commercials in Iceland for his party, where the last 2 times we've had elections was like around his daughter's birthday. So he did commercials where he was shown decorating cakes for her birthday. And so he went to the Commission on the Status of Women meeting, so I guess this is 2017. Yeah, that's when he was prime minister. And went to the He for She campaign, and he decorated a cake and gave it to the head of Fueling Women. Are we just, you know, bringing in cakes into the international system, or are we actually doing something to transform? You know, if you're only branding, maybe the content is left wanting a little bit. Thank you.
So more food for thought. So thank you very much. And now, last but not least,
Thank you. Education acts like a virus. If you don't deal with it until it's too late, it takes time to recover. So it's good that education is that late. I'll be talking about small state education policy making in times of supranational reform influences. Well, first of all, what do I mean as supranational reform influences, and why does this make sense for a small country to study? Well, these influences can be characterized by three characteristics. One, they're grounded in neoliberal ideology and new public management. For you to have an understanding of this, for instance, you pay taxes for your kids' education, and out of the taxes, the state pays the teachers' salaries, but then you also pay rent for textbooks. In Armenia, you pay for the lunch of the students, you pay for the transport. So one characteristic of this neoliberal system is direct versus indirect taxes. And the indirect taxes are really not levied officially, but they are officially in the place. Second, this is neoliberalism is about privatization of education. So we're talking about per capita funding of education, and a result of which typically is that a good school which manages to attract a number of students becomes even better, and a school that's not a good school does not manage to attract students and becomes even worse. Another characteristic of neoliberalism is, for instance, decentralization. When it is assumed that the state is not a good manager and the private is a good manager. And in many countries across the world, you can see private academies or networks of schools which are managed by private institutions, because the essence is that the state is not a good manager. Now I can go into detail in this, but my goal here is to give you an understanding. Let's say in 1997, Armenia's government made the statement. It said that education should not be the only burden on the state's shoulder, and that citizens should also carry the responsibility. As a result of which, Armenia's education funding since 1997 up to now has not increased to higher than 3% GDP. And what has really happened is the state has always came up and claimed that since there is also the private, then the private needs to take care of something, and then the state will take care of the rest. Second, these influences are spread through policy borrowing. Policy borrowing is a term in policy studies which describes how one policy or a policy ideology in one place moves to another place and informs policy making in another country. Now, the typical case of this would be if you Google best practices in Armenia, it will bring thousands of records. And if you open up any government report in Armenia or anywhere in the world, it will make references to other countries, saying that we are not the authors of this solely. We have learned from this internationally. But international learning is really something very questionable in terms of comparative policy studies, because contexts are different. And there is this notion of loose decoupling, the idea of which is you cannot copy for 100% one policy in a country X to a country Y. So whenever you copy a policy, something loses, and then something is added. And whatever is added basically depends on the ideology of the copiers. Now third, these influences are carried or fueled by development aid money and by normative research. Now what do I mean by development aid money? Do you know who's the largest donor of education globally? Is there any idea? Yes. So World Bank is the largest donor of education globally. By 2015, the World Bank had closed deals worth 69 billion across the world. The way the World Bank does policy making, and this is not about the World Bank, but this is also, let's say, Asian Development Bank. This is about the Pan-American Development Bank, so any development bank. The way they function is they have this huge teams of economists who define the policies because they think this is the right policy to be implemented, and then they provide the money to a country like Armenia or a country like Russia, doesn't really matter. They provide the money based on some conditionality. This was usually provided through structural adjustment loans. This is now provided through adaptable program loans. The idea is very simple. An expertise group visits the country before the policy is defined. It works with the country's policymakers. It brings some understanding of best practice policies that need to be implemented. And it leaves with these policies being tied to the loan conditionality. So if Armenia wants to get the loan, it needs to implement the reforms specifically in the direction that was applied. Now, for you to, let's say, to give a full picture of this, In terms of the absolute terms of loans received, Armenia is number one among the post-Soviet states from the World Bank. And Armenia's education sector is predominantly developed by the World Bank aid. If you just Google the World Bank's website, it will claim that the World Bank is the largest source of knowledge and finance for the developing world. If you go to OECD PISA, the test that is administered globally among 15-year-olds in sciences, mathematics, and reading, you would read that the goal of PISA is to inform policymakers across the globe on best practices for achieving number of policy outcomes. And the way that OECD works, again, the website claims that the OECD experts come up with these recommendations, which are later offered to governments to implement. And governments typically do not have the resources, neither they have the technical capacity to be very judgmental about the policies that they are being proposed. They just view these policies as a source of, as a means of becoming part of the global modern world. Now, the second component of this is normative research. The idea of normative research is in policy science, you have two types of research. Generally, one type of research is research that is ideographic, so it aims at understanding specific cases in specific contexts. And even when it does cross-case analysis, the goal is not to come up with recommendations, it is to come up with findings. So it's more grounded in this grounded theory approach. But normative research is very linear. It comes up with the thinking that there are practices that can be implemented anywhere across the world, and that they will provide similar outcomes. Now, the supranational reform influences were characterized by Pasi Salberg, the author of the Finnish Lessons 2, the person who basically popularized Finland as an educational success story and explained how the whole thing happened. He terms this as a global educational reform movement, and the abbreviation is GERM. And GERM is a synonym for virus. So it's in there. Okay? Now, this influence is spread like germs, and countries who do not have the capacity to understand how this happens are much more vulnerable to this. We can claim that these influences are unofficial because nowhere in the world you can read in any document which would say that our policy is based on neoliberal thinking or on new public management. There's nothing like this that you can read. You will read about equity, you will read about all the good things that can be enjoyed. But these policies are reflected formally in educational reform agendas. They were formally reflected in the Millennium Development Goals tied to it, the Education for All movement from 2000 to 2015. This movement did not succeed the way it was planned. One of the reasons that the concluding report stated was that countries did not came to own the reforms because the reforms were driven from, let's say, center to periphery model, and the countries did not really own it. They didn't really understand what the reform is about. Now that we're talking about sustainable development goals and education 2030 agenda, the irony of this is that the person who stood beyond World Bank's educational team at that time, his surname is Sakharopoulos, is a professor of education economics at LSE. He served at the World Bank for 17 years, and he came up with a statement saying that I did not attend the Education 2030 meeting because I thought it was not going to work, but yet the bank pushed it through. Okay? And then you can see various minor yet global influences like the OECD's Future of Education and Skills, like the World Economic Forum's Future of Education and Skills. So today, whenever you Google education and skills, it is all tied to this reform influence. But you will not understand this because you will think that it's a brilliant thing. Okay? Now, what does germ versus small do, and where is the opportunity for small states? Well, one, small states means small economies means fivefold larger dependence on aid money. And this means that unless you take care for your public administration system and to develop your technical capacities of your public administrators, you're continuously going to end up following policies that may be good. Again, I'm not claiming that following the World Bank policy is either good or bad, What I'm claiming is you need to be very judgmental about what you're doing. So if you don't really understand whether it's good for your country or bad, probably you shouldn't do this. There was a meeting, there was a session at Armenia's national parliament, I think in early 2000s, when the education minister said that we do not agree with this policy, but the bank is providing us money for another policy and we have to agree. Okay, so this is one of the characteristics of a smaller economy. Second, it's limited influence on events outside. So Armenia cannot influence what the World Bank thinks, what the Asian Development Bank thinks globally, because for us to imagine, the World Bank has published about 19,000 peer-reviewed articles in top journals internationally. That's higher than world's top 5 universities have published together. So it's really very high number of publications. And Armenia cannot influence that. But what Armenia can do, the example of Finland is a good example here. What Armenia can do is Armenia can be smart, and this is where I agree with Nalik's idea of slow but smart. Armenia can be smart about what it wants to follow and how it wants to follow, and then how it wants to navigate between the aid money that it obviously needs and its priorities. Again, an example here is before mid-2000s, Armenia's reliance on aid money, let's say the World Bank, was much higher than it's today, because today you have other donors as well who are ready to provide finance, and there is some room of navigation, not big room, because there is this germ when in however phase it appears to you. But Armenia can be agile, and Armenia can win with its agility, speed, and creativity, because we're talking about a very small scale. Let's say if we're talking about school education, we're talking about maximum 1,400 schools. Kazakhstan has about 4,000 only rural schools, so there is no way you can compare the scale. But Armenia can also benefit from its creativity, but this all needs to be based on one, research, and this is why I highly value this initiative, and two, on public administrators, because they are the people who negotiate with this, they are the people who face germ firsthand. Okay? When it reaches the third sector, like the foundations, it's either too late, or it's in the big part and you can change on the way. I think this is what I wanted to say. I was lazy, I didn't prepare more slides. I will end up with this.
Small is good.
Small but small.
Exactly. Right, thank you very much. I can imagine people have lots of questions. There's a lot of food for thought for me, for certain. We unfortunately have some, not too much time. So, people have questions, maybe you can raise your hands and I think we take a round, or if there's only one question so far, then one by one. All right, looks like there's only one question, yes.
When I came to this meeting, I was thinking that this topic would be about the most based on the international relations, security relations, etc. But surprisingly for me, not that surprisingly, only women speakers spoken about that, and men didn't avoid that topic.
Okay, thank you
So
for the comment.
I have to hear what is the basis for small state definitions coming from geopolitics.
I think, yeah.
I think I already thought about this. So there are many definitions, many concepts that help define a state as a nation, as a small state. So I say that one of the variables in defining states as a small concerns with territory size, concerns with security challenges, economy size, etc. So if we think about, so one of the directions in this initiative concerns security, and Armenia as a small state is in an unstable region, and taking into consideration the puzzle, the geopolitical puzzle of our region. So we need to understand what kind of security challenges do we have, and what kind of solutions we can have in order to provide smart responses to the challenges. So, if you could redefine your question, you want to understand how to define small state as a small geopolitical. So I couldn't understand your question. So,
Well, to me, you can divide global political system into like 3 levels on first level estimation. On the top level, you have, for example, maybe one or dominant country which is defining global politics. Currently, it is the United States. On the second level, there are regional powers.
okay.
Regional powers, they have a capacity to challenge the first power. So they do usually by pushing the small neighbor countries around them to the policies they want to. The third level is the small countries. The small countries have a chance to live in the 21st century because the global power has enough capacity to make the make alliances with small countries. So they're using these small countries, United States, making alliances and keeps the regional powers in the check, under check. So
Okay.
the first approximation of the definition of the small states is this. The other policies, small states are taking over. For example, in case of Iceland, for case of gender equality, etc. It is just at their will, at their option. They are finding some niche and they are providing some policy which also feeds the global security policy led by United States government.
All right, so for the esteemed gentleman who didn't introduce himself, it seems small means weak.
Yeah.
Right, so, and I see you wanting to say something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point to think that, small states generally tend to be system effective. Small states do not set policy at the international arena. And the example that I was giving is how you can use a niche diplomacy to gain credibility. It's also, if you take it one step further, Iceland is a member of NATO, for example, and by bringing in this expertise in gender equality into a military organization, it has gained status and recognition, which makes it more important to NATO. So it actually benefits from not trying to compete at the same level, which it has no possibility of doing, but of finding a specialization where it can make itself noticeable and thus more important, getting more support from international alliances, and in particular from great powers, because that is, as Marek mentioned in his introduction, this idea of the shelter that my colleague Walter Korosson has been developing for the last few years, is that small states need somebody who provides protection for them. In my own research on Icelandic security, however, what we find is that, and of course our placement in the world is very different from yours, since we live in a very stable region, and here there is far more instability to deal with. We find that people are less concerned with military threats because the focus is more on what people perceive as what can actually damage them, which is environmental hazards and natural disasters. So it's the earthquakes and volcanoes and global warming or global climate change that can actually change the sea levels and like these kinds of things that people actually want to see responses. And these are things that you cannot get from international alliances in general. You can certainly work with international organizations on developing policies and responses and building resilience and so on. But these are issues that small states actually have to build their own capacity, and then maybe networks for international assistance, which like Narek as well mentioned with like the World Bank, how they can come in and contribute to capacities that small states maybe have not had the opportunity to develop. But I think, one of the issues, the reason I think we're very excited that this initiative is getting started here is that the small state studies has been very Western European focused. We haven't really had the opportunity to apply these ideas in regions where there are maybe more threatening hegemons, where there is more political and military instability. Whether the ideas that we have about what has helped us as small states in Western Europe and especially maybe in Northern Europe develop and build strength, that this is something that maybe doesn't work here. Maybe there are completely different perspectives. So the geopolitical part, which again you mentioned was security, is one of the themes that we're going to be working on here. I think that would be a very interesting development to follow in the next few years. Sort of like Estonia, which he mentioned, built on a deficit and made themselves very important to NATO. They now have a NATO Center of Excellence for cybersecurity, and NATO has started to rely on Estonia for developments in this field, which once they were weak because they were small, now they are resilient, agile, responsive, and are actually a strength to the alliance. So the smallness can be an asset rather than a weakness.
Also, small states can let's say, compensate their smallness in the international system if you, as a small state, introduce what you can do for the international system, what is your concept, what is your brand in the international system. For example, during our foreign minister's recent visit to Estonia, he introduced the idea of mutual support of small states. That small states can work in mutual support, and then small states can be, for example, in the future form a vector in international system, be a vector, and of course in the international system key players are great powers or regional powers, and small states rise to that power. But when you cooperate, when you try to provide your importance in the international system, it doesn't matter you are small or not. It's important to introduce ideas, to introduce your value to the international system.
All right. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I want to speak about public policy. So, generally, when we speak about public policy, we mean the public policy of big powers, yes, US, Russia, or China, and the public policy of small states are to some point ignored in this sense. And for example, yesterday I searched on Google Scholar on this topic, and only a few articles were written. I want to know there are any relevant theories on this topic. I mean, public diplomacy of small states, or maybe new public diplomacy of small states. So, can you speak about the conceptualization of this topic? Maybe a woman from the Iceland.
So on public policy of small states, or on small states diplomacy, rather? Or
No, small states public diplomacy.
Public diplomacy. There isn't, I don't think there is very much on this yet. There is a special issue from there's a Journal of Place Branding and Public Diplomacy, I think it is, as a special issue from about 2 years ago. The editor is Nicholas Cull, C-U-L-L, and that's a special issue on the Nordic countries and their branding and public diplomacy issues. That's the only one I can think of right now. And I don't think, I don't remember any specific ones on this, on public diplomacy on small states aside from that. But there is, I mean, there's a large literature on small states, and then on public administration, foreign policy, on security policy, and so on. For example, the conference that I mentioned was held in Iceland last summer There's a lot of there's working papers and policy briefs on security policy of small states, for example, that are accessible online.
Right. Tell me what do you think is the right thing to do? Right, I was thinking, so yeah, we're supposed to have a reception. I think we can continue this wonderful conversation over some nice snacks. So thank you very much. It's been a great audience. I have the honor of showing, giving this small tokens of appreciation. Those are just for you to remember and for. Thank you very much for the great work and your contributions. And if I can just quickly say one last comment. I thought it was a great discussion because we don't often talk about how Armenia should, what do we want to see, like how should Armenia be? And today I think we heard ideas about not just what our problems are, but what is our vision? How do we want to be seen in an international world? And I think we have good examples of, small can be smart, can be flexible. So I find that very inspirational. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Just one sentence. I just want to say that within this initiative, we decided to create a lecture series by the Nordic ambassadors and the United States ambassador to Armenia. Now we have confirmed lecture by Ambassador of Iceland to Armenia, Berlin, who will be lecturing on again for small states foreign policy on 27th of May in our university. And so we plan to make this into annual gathering, and I hope next year we can organize international forum workshop consisting of conceptual talks on the future of Armenia as a small state. What is our vision? What is the concept of Armenia that we want to apply? Again, it doesn't matter. We are small or not. We can propose our ideas, our concept to the world, and we can be a part of global politics because we are a small state but a global nation. Thank you.